Hello, my name is Paolo Carrette and I'm the Chief Executive of Online Mentor, and this is an overview about what you need to know about your training contract records. Before setting out what they should look like, a quick word about why you need to be doing it in the first place. And there are three key stakeholders here. First, the SRA as regulator. Secondly, your firm as your employer and training provider. And thirdly, you as an individual lawyer and trainee. Let's start with the regulatory side of things. And in the SRA Training Regs 2014, Regulation 14.1, the SRA says that you must maintain a record of training which contains details of work performed. So what that means actually are examples of experiences that you've had on the job. And that is the essence really of the training record. It's about work-based experience, work-based training. And when thinking about those examples, think about how they helped you acquire, apply and develop your key legal skill sets. And this needs to be done with reference to the practice skills standards, which is an SRA construct which I'll come back to in a moment. So as well as picking examples of experience, linking it to your development of key legal skills, from time to time your training record also needs to capture your reflections on your performance and how you've developed. And we know from experience this is something which many lawyers find really difficult, partly because it's just not something they particularly want to do or feel comfortable doing, or in some cases it's more to do with never really having been shown what reflection might look like in practice. And in a separate video we'll actually work through a reflective training contract record entry to hopefully help plug the gap in this area to a degree. And finally, your training record also needs to be verified by your supervisors, and typically this coincides with mid-seat and end-of-seat reviews. Note also that the stuff that you do in your training record is also about you enabling your training principal to meet his or her regulatory responsibilities in this area, because it's ultimately their responsibility for making sure that you do this. But also looking ahead to when you are nearing the end of your training contract, note that there is a formal SRA form called the AD1 which the firm submits in order to put your name on the roll and to get your first practicing certificate. And note that both you and your training principal have to sign that form, but your training principal before signing that form has to be happy that he or she can say that you indeed have kept a full and complete record of your training as per the regulatory requirements we've just set out. Okay, so a training record has to refer to the practice skills standards. What are the practice skills standards? Well, in broad terms, if you imagine somebody at the SRA being asked to itemize the key legal skills and competencies which any NQ solicitor in England and Wales, whether they be high street or high-end corporate commercial, what is it that they need to be competent in? Well, the practice skills standards is basically that framework of skills and competencies. And as such, it seems to me that probably nothing in this list will be a surprise to you. We would all expect any NQ anywhere in the country to be basically competent in these areas. But note a number of things about the practice skills standards. First of all, that whilst there may be 8 or 9 core headings, they are just headings. The actual specified skills are elaborated under each of those headings, and there are about 90 of them when you kind of add them all up. Now, a couple of things. Firstly, when you first log on to Online Mentor, when you go to the knowledge base side of the platform, you'll see that we have summarized those 90 plus skills and competencies for you, and it's a really good idea for you to spend just a few moments getting your head around the full breadth of the practice skills standards before you start using the online platform. Secondly, those words at the bottom, do it yourself, help others or observe, are very relevant when trying to understand what experience counts for the practice skills standards, because the SRA kind of gets that there are certain skills which trainees may struggle to have exposure to during their training contract. And a really good example of that is advocacy. It's quite unusual nowadays for a trainee to have very much, if any, stand-up tribunal advocacy on their own behalf. But that doesn't matter so much, because actually if you observe your supervisor, for example, lead a employment tribunal, for example, or if you're sat behind counsel in open court or in district judge, in judges' chambers, well, that's also valuable and pertinent experience. So experience that you derive from observing others is relevant when building up evidence against the practice skills standards. So have a think about that before you start building up your own training record. If we put all of these ideas together, what we can say is that a training record needs to capture examples of your experience, and this needs to be selective. So it's absolutely not a duplicate time recording system. But there need to be a sufficient number of examples, both in terms of breadth and depth, for it to be broadly representative of your training. But also remember that what you capture needs to cross-refer to the relevant practice skills standards, and from time to time remember to say something about your development and how you might do things better or differently next time, which is another way in broad terms of saying you've got to be reflective sometimes in your training record. So, as a slightly tongue-in-cheek example, just to check that we've all been paying attention and it all makes sense, let's say that you're in property and you complete 20 TR1 forms in a particular week. Would you A, create 20 entries in your training record for each and every TR1, or would you perhaps B, create one entry in your training record for that experience holistically, where you perhaps summarize what you learned at the end of the process? Well, clearly, given what we've said, it's B, not A. And if you don't keep your training record up to date, there are a few consequences which I've noted there on the slide, which I'll let you absorb. Okay, so that's what happens if you don't do it. Which takes us on to your firm's expectations and how this fits in with what they want to do with you. And again, the detail will differ potentially depending upon the firm that you're in, but generally speaking, the training record is linked in most of our client firms, if not all of them, to the appraisal process in some way, shape or form. So for example, in most of our client firms it is part of the discussion at mid and end of seat reviews. So you either print it off and take it with you, or your supervisor has logged on and reviewed it before the meeting, and it becomes part of the conversation piece about your development and the kind of work that you're doing and whether it's stretching you and developing you. Also, mid and end of seat reviews is typically where your supervisors will verify your training record, and again they will either do this by logging on to the online mentor system and using our online sign-off function, or you will be printing off your training record and getting them to sign it there and then. At those firms that have their own competency, or sometimes referred to as a contribution framework, alongside or in addition to the SRA practice skills standards, the training record becomes a vehicle for gathering your experience in relation to those key firm specific KPIs. And what you'll find typically is that you can kill two birds with one stone. So your technical competencies will be relevant both for the SRA framework and your firm's competency framework. But there may be some examples where actually the SRA doesn't say very much at all. So business development, networking, you'll find nothing about that in the practice skills standards, whereas it may be something very important for you to demonstrate that you're on top of and taking action in relation to for the firm. And finally, note that this process of reflecting on your experience is becoming increasingly relevant and important for firms as they transition towards the new SRA continuing competence regime, which makes it a requirement for solicitors, once they qualify, to reflect on a regular basis on their performance. And finally, you. How do you fit into this as an individual? Well, firstly, what what we know from experience and from feedback from our client firms is that those trainees who carve out the necessary time and energy to build up a good training record, it makes them look good because it makes you look very committed to your learning and development. Secondly, the process of using the system and building up your training record is a good way of reviewing your progress against the SRA and any firm-specific key performance indicators. And actually there's plenty of research evidence out there, for example from the Harvard Business School, which says that the process of capturing your reflections on a regular basis does have a demonstrable effect in terms of improving your own professional performance in practice. So the doing of the training contract record is actually very much part of your learning and development. It will assist your performance. And finally, and this is based upon feedback that comes through to us from time to time from trainees, by building up, in effect, a database of your experiences, you're building up a CV builder, which may become relevant and useful for NQ applications towards the end of your training contract. Okay, so that's really what you need to know about why you should keep a training contract record. What we'll move on to now is very, very quickly showing you the key slides of what the system looks like. This isn't going to be a detailed how-to. We'll send you some other links to other how-to videos, but this is very much just about orientating yourself in relation to the key features of the system. Because what you'll find when you log in is that it's a hopefully very intuitive system which allows you to capture examples of your work-based experience or, from time to time where relevant, your training or other professional development. And one of the first choices that you'll have is about assigning it to a particular practice area. And this will either be Legal 500 or it'll be tailored to your firm's practice groups and departments, depending upon the version of Online Mentor that you are using. And then the interface effectively allows you to capture the relevant data and put it in to the online forms. One thing to note at the top there is case file matter number. That's actually very important, because it's one way of making sure that you don't pepper your training record entries with unnecessary references to your client and or the transaction that you're working on, because there is absolutely no need, for the purposes of a training contract record, for you as a trainee to refer to your client by name or to transactions by name. Now it's slightly different if you're in corporate, because things like project names, Project Phoenix, Project Star, Project Olive, that's fine because they are confidential and generic. But no way should you be referring to specific transactions and clients in your training record. You then have the option of clicking contentious or non-contentious. This is typically more relevant in relation to contentious experience. And this is relevant where perhaps you're a trainee who may not get substantive litigation experience during their training contract, or at least not very much of it. In which case, tagging the experience that you do have and that you do get is very useful. And then you can tell the system basically what it is that you did and what it is that you learned. And again, the example that we've given you there is very plain vanilla. There's nothing big or complicated about it. So just say what it is that you did, no more and no less. And if actually the example that you're giving requires you to elaborate a bit further, then of course, by all means do. But hopefully this example shows that actually training record entries can be short and sharp. What the system also then enables you to do, having given a brief summary of the task work done and your reflections, if and where appropriate, is to tag the relevant practice skills standards. And again, depending upon the firm that you're at, it may be that you can also tag relevant elements within your own competency framework. The example that we gave was some research, and so you can very happily in this example tick all three of the research skills practice skills standards. And what you'll notice is that the numbers will change on the right hand side. The system, because it's linking to dynamic database will remember the number of times that you've ticked that box previously. And this will enable you to see how your coverage against the practice skill standards is shaping up over your training contract. And you'll be able to see patterns and gaps potentially, which may pause you to reflect upon whether there is something that you could do to plug them. What you can also do is, if you know a key word that you think is in the practice skills standard somewhere, or your competency framework somewhere, you can put that in and the system can help you find the relevant element within that framework, and you can tick it accordingly. And then once you've built up your training record to a degree, it will become relevant from time to time to review it, and all of your entries are available in a search field. And you can view entries either individually, or you can print them off either in their entirety or within certain date ranges. And you can see there on the top right hand corner that you can also print your training records off via your browsers. And all that you've put in is then reflected back in the output screens, and those links to the practice skill standards, for example, are very clearly made there. You can search with reference to date parameters. If you put in a date, the system will automatically filter the entries accordingly. You can search by keywords, and again the system will filter down those entries which refer to your keyword. You can search and restrict your search by reference to practice areas if you so wish, and also with reference to the practice skill standards or your own competencies, etc., if you wish. Okay, let's finish off by looking at expectations around activity. How often should you be doing this? Well, let's unpack this, because broadly speaking, the expectation around a training record is that it's more or less a weekly activity. It's not specified as such, but that's kind of where it comes from. And broadly speaking, in our experience, trainees who spend up to 30 minutes per week will find that they can create plenty of examples in their training record entry. Having said that, some weeks of course will be really busy and it will be the furthest thing from your mind, and we understand that and we get that. But what we urge you to think about is not to allow a month to go by without creating any entries whatsoever, because that's where we're starting to pull at the edges of what is acceptable in terms of maintaining a training contract record. And again, based upon our experience of trainees at our client firms, we've noticed really 3 or 4 variations on how trainees go about this. One way of using the system is on an ad hoc basis. So you have some experience, you think that's relevant for my training record, I will log that there and then. So it might be 5 minutes here or there. The other approach, or another approach, is to look at it as a weekly activity and set aside 30 minutes each week, potentially on a Friday afternoon, to look back on the week and capture those examples that you think are most appropriate for putting into your training record. Sometimes it might be that you actually will only get to it on a monthly basis. Again, that's fine, except note a couple of things. Firstly, you'll find it surprising how quickly you lose the essence of the experience that you had after a month or so. And also note that partly because of that, if you do your training record on a monthly basis, you'll probably have some lead-in time to sort of refresh yourself on what it is that you did and why you think it's relevant for your training record. And the number of it is that probably doing it monthly means that to do it properly is probably an investment at least of 2 hours, if not half a day of your time. Or you do a mix of the above. Sometimes monthly might work best, sometimes ad hoc, sometimes weekly. It really is up to you to find a style and a pattern that works for you. Clearly, reminding yourself to do it is the starting point, and certainly Outlook reminders are a good idea. So diarise the job as a job that needs doing on a regular basis. Do it, but also crucially record your time, because the process of maintaining a training record is actually part of your training. It is a very valuable way to spend your time from a learning and development perspective. So please do record your time as appropriate. And note also that obviously we can run some numbers for for the firm that highlights your engagement levels. So if you don't do it, the firm will know about it and they will pick up with you on it. And whilst there are no black and whites at all here, if we had to sort of specify what we're saying in terms of activity levels, what we would say is that on the basis of 30 minutes or so per week, a couple of hours per month, it is absolutely no problem at all to create 12, sometimes many more than 12 actually, entries per month on a regular basis. And that's kind of the starting point for good in our interpretation. 1 or 2 entries per week, so let's say 6 or so per month, is possibly just about okay, especially if those entries are reflective in nature, but okay at best. And below that, anything less than 6 entries per month is really quite poor and may raise questions about whether you're doing enough to maintain a satisfactory training contract record. Okay, well that's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions on a technical level, then obviously bring those to us. Anything about expectations in relation to the firm and what you're expected to do internally, well, raise that with a member of your team.